Thank you for coming today. I really want to thank the Center for South Asia for inviting me to speak, and particularly Lolita Duparon for her ongoing support of this research. She's done everything from spend time with me learning Hindi both officially and unofficially to writing recommendations, and also having a lot of informal discussions about this topic. I also really want to thank my advisor, Aparna Darwadkar, who has supported me every step of the way and put a lot of time and effort into her training and supporting me as a scholar, and for a very flattering and intimidating introduction. A few things I'd like to let you know about before I start. The first is that this talk is somewhat graphic. I'll be talking about violence against women, and I'll be describing some of that violence in detail. I choose to share these details not to shock or disturb you, but because they come directly from media and scholarly articles on the event I will be discussing. As such, these details have become a part of the event's continuous reperformance, a phenomena I will discuss later in this talk. If at any point these details become a little bit much for you, I will absolutely not be offended if you need to leave the room. The second thing I want to briefly mention before I begin is that this talk is based on preliminary research for my dissertation. I spent the past summer, June to August, in India, mostly in Kolkata, although I spent a few weeks in Mumbai and Delhi as well. I'll be returning to India in July for another full year of research. And as such, this talk is going to do a lot of introducing performances and ideas and questions without necessarily providing answers or satisfying conclusions. There is exciting and inspiring and disturbing artistic and political performance work addressing violence against women taking place in India right now. And it's my primary goal today to give you a sense of the depth and breadth of the performances taking place that are in some way a part of what I will call the Nirbhaya event. My secondary goal is to begin considering the reasons why performance is a necessary part of the conversation about violence against women in modern India. So here goes. On December 16th, 2012, in Delhi, a young woman was brutally gang raped on a bus and then dumped on the side of the road. 13 days later, in a Singapore hospital, she died of injuries she had received that night. Her name was Jyoti Singh Pandey, but over the course of this talk, I will primarily be referring to her as Nirbhaya, or Fearless One. Why this is opposed to her real name or another alias? Indian law requires the media to get permission from a rape victim, or if she is dead, her family, in order to use her name. The media came up with a number of aliases until they received this permission, which included, but are not limited to, Jagruti, which means awareness, Jyoti, which means flame, Amanat, which means treasure, Nirbhaya, Fearless One, Damini, lightning, which is after a 1993 Hindi film, and Delhi, Braveheart. I use Nirbhaya for a number of reasons. Number one is that it's the most internationally recognizable and has come to stand for something more than just the rape of Jyoti Singh Pandey. Number two is that it is the most performative of the many pseudonyms given to Pandey before her name was released. Nirbhaya is literally the one who performs a lack of fear, who is defined by her fearlessness. There's something both troubling and inspiring about a name that claims women should not feel afraid or perhaps not show their fear in the face of increasingly common and violent reports on sexual assault in India. And the third reason is that many of the performances I will discuss in this talk use the name Nirbhaya when referring to the Delhi bus gang rape case. By the time Pandey died, her story was internationally known. It had sparked massive protests throughout India and on social media. It had also, I argue, dramatically influenced international attitudes towards sexual violence worldwide. Within 1 week of the attack, a special judicial committee, the Justice Verma Committee, had been convened to review the Indian Penal Code regarding sexual assault and make recommendations to amend it to more justly deal with future sexual assault cases. When I traveled in India nearly 2 years after Pandey's death, it seemed like everyone, from tourists to mountain villagers, from theater directors to rickshaw drivers, knew her story and had strong opinions about what it meant for the past, present, and future of India. Many feminist groups use Nirbhaya as a rallying point for reinvigorating a discussion of policy, enforcement, and patriarchal cultural norms. Artists found in themselves an urgency to create in response. Conservative pundits exploited the gruesome nature of the incident to argue for stricter laws to deal with urban migrants from lower classes and castes, and to further constrict women's freedom outside the home. The gang rape of Jyoti Singh Pandey had become an event whose reverberations would reach forward and backward in time, affecting how artists, activists, academics, and many others approach their work on violence against women. Over the course of my dissertation, I'll trace the making of the Nirbhaya event as well as its continued representation. My research will be based primarily on participant observer encounters with various artists and activists currently working in the cities of Delhi, Kolkata, and Mumbai. The urgent questions that drive my research are these. How does the event shape performances? And how do performances in turn shape events? In other words, how does the event of the Delhi bus gang rape encourage or demand certain responses or modes of performance? And how do these performances create micro shifts in the narrative of the event itself? Why performance? What does performance studies as methodology contribute to our understanding of the Nirbhaya event? What role does performance play in affixing concrete meaning to the event or to our imagined communities of India or Indians in our memories? What role might performance play in challenging these meanings, in decoupling Nirbhaya from any straightforward narrative of tragic female victim and exceptionally vicious male rapists, in embodying new or unique perspectives of women and their relationship to their bodies, other bodies, and public space? In particular, the low-tech, low-budget, body-centered, devised, ensemble nature of many of the performances I discuss creates dissonance in the neoliberal narrative of women's freedom to move through urban spaces as long as they are doing it as consumers. Finally, I want to think about what performance can do to help us answer the question of where do we go from here, on a local scale in the communities with which I will be working, on a national scale as India looks to resuscitate its image as a safe place to be a woman, and on an international scale as other violences against women become well-known worldwide. What role might play, and I mean the double entendre of play as theater and play as fun, have in this process? So to start with, I want to talk a little bit about why Nirbhaya. According to the National Crime Records Bureau in 2011, 24,206 rape cases were reported in India, with many more going unreported. Against such a statistic, the amount of attention the Nirbhaya case received both nationally and internationally seems anomalous. Poulami Roy Chowdhury found more than 1,515 articles on the Nirbhaya incident in the United States in the 2 months following the violent gang rape. So why Nirbhaya? Why is this the case that becomes an ongoing event, the rallying cry for an entire movement? Other scholars have addressed this question more generally, and I have my own theories, but I intend to take my cue primarily from what makes this event so meaningful to the many different performers who respond to it. For instance, the women of the group Why Loiter were concerned with what the Nirbhaya event said about women's rights to urban public space, particularly after dark. Neha Singh, the leader of the group, based their performative protests on the book Why Loiter? Women in Risk on Mumbai Streets by Shilpa Phadke, Samira Khan, and Shilpa Ranade, but it was clear that the Nirbhaya event had been another important catalyst. Jyoti Singh Pandey was out late with a male friend. They had gone to see a movie. By the time the film ended, it was difficult to find the public transportation they needed to get home. What happened to Pandey highlights the fact that a large city like Delhi is not safe after dark for women, even if they have a male escort. And as the book Why Loiter argues, quote, safety and order are prized in the new global city, end quote. This new global city is the neoliberal city, the city saturated with international corporations, a city that is meant to belong to the upper and upper middle classes. Thus, safety for women is framed through the creation of a fallacious opposition between the middle-class respectable woman and the vagrant male. This is what led to international media mobilization as well, the ways in which this event could be read as a violation of modern rights-bearing subjects in an India torn between the new, modern, and neoliberal on one hand, and the old and traditional on the other. And this leads directly to the second reason the Nirbhaya event captured the public imagination so completely. Jyoti Singh Pandey was a physiotherapy student paying for her classes with a job at a call center, a woman firmly on the upwardly mobile quest for true middle-class status. Her father had sold some of his land in his native village to come to Delhi and work 2 shifts a day loading luggage at the airport to pay for her college education. Pandey was engaging in a behavior that the global city prioritizes for its citizens, the spending of money in exchange for leisure, in the form of going to the movies. She was behaving respectably and cautiously. She was not wandering out alone at night, and the later revelation that the man who was with her was her boyfriend would not do much to detract from this narrative. Pandey was the perfect heroine, a young woman with a bright future in front of her, a potential member of a burgeoning middle class, and respectable, in other words, capable of being defiled. Perhaps even more central to the reasons Nirbhaya became an international media phenomenon, the violence inflicted on her body becomes legible as a violation because it fetters her desire for modernity and its accoutrements. And as such, her violation rationalizes a particular set of politicized claims. In other words, the gang rape and Pandey's subsequent death could be mobilized as a cautionary tale of the challenges India faces in its attempts to modernize, as in become more Western and consequentially more neoliberal. The perpetrators of the violent gang rape, on the other hand, were the perfect villains, the people from whom women in public space must be protected, the epitome of the vagrant male, read lower class, often unemployed, often lower caste or Muslim. For instance, as Roy Chowdhury observes, quote, CNN likened the assailants to men in other traditional societies who see improvements in the status of women as a challenge to their own and who use rape as a weapon of power against such advances. Notions of Western gender progressivism implicitly and explicitly guided these commentaries, end quote. 4 of the 6 men accused of carrying out the gang rape lived in a slum called Ravidas Camp, a poor pocket in the otherwise largely middle-class neighborhood of RK Puram, whose tree-lined boulevards contrast with the narrow lanes and open sewers of their slum. 2 of the 4 were described as loud and heavy drinkers who had a tendency to drink and drive. The crime itself took place in a relatively affluent area of the city. Pandey and her companion had just left a modern mall after seeing Life of Pi in English. These men were seen to be attacking not just Pandey, but her way of life as symbolized in the carefree act of going out to see a movie. On a less cynical note, this gang rape was exceptionally horrifying. It is a story that stays with you, that demands your attention and your emotional reaction. One newspaper reported that at some point, one of the assailants had seen Ram Singh pulling her intestines out with his hands through her vagina. Yes, many other stories have since come to light, which in terms of sheer brutality measure up to the Nirbhaya event, but hers was the first that the media covered quite so extensively. Whether the media was following the whims of its consumers or vice versa is debatable, but the fact is that the publicizing of the Nirbhaya event across international media outlets opened the door for other stories to be told more publicly. My answer then to the question of why Nirbhaya was not why not write about some other event, some other performance of violence against women, is as follows. The Nirbhaya event represents a substantial shift in the narrative of women, sexual violence, neoliberalism, and public space in India. The shame and suspicion that frequently accompanies most women who dare to cry rape was absent in her case, partly because of the obvious physical signs of violent assault, but also because her story could be politicized as part of an even larger narrative, one that pitted modern India as a neoliberal subject against traditional India and the impoverished masses. By analyzing the gang rape of Jyoti Singh Pandey as an event, I illuminate the ideologies at play in this false binary and turn to performance for a more complex picture of the influence this event has had on people, culture, and politics in India. What makes the Nirbhaya event such a crucial subject of study is exactly that it touches on so many different scholarly and political debates. It insists that all of these ideas are inextricably intertwined, and it also indicates the importance of studying theater and performance in modern India as embodied and resistant practices that reach a surprisingly large audience in cities that are otherwise embracing the neoliberal shift toward technology and consumption, and as embodied practices that make politicized claims about bodies, claims that are particularly important when discussing Indian feminisms. Since the Nirbhaya event, there has been one paper on a performance related to Nirbhaya. It was on Nirbhaya, the play, by Yael Farber, and the paper was written by Bishnupriya Paul Dutt and delivered at a conference. But other than that, no one has taken on the task of discussing the Nirbhaya event and its performative and performance implications. There have been a number of articles worthy of mention that address other aspects of the Nirbhaya event and its aftermath. Pulami Roy Chowdhury's The Delhi Gang Rape, The Making of International Causes analyzes the way the international media has developed the story of the gang rape. In particular, Roy Chowdhury warns that, quote, to the extent that the undeniable tragedy of Pandey's assault and death helps secure Indian women's abilities to be consumers and ready participants in India's neoliberal economy, the making of this international cause poses real dangers for women's rights, end quote. Tara At-Lori's The Young and the Restless, Gender, Youth, and the Delhi Gang Rape Case of 2012 focuses on the way urban Indian youth became the villains of the Nirbhaya event, cast as idle young men in a wider moment of global recession and austerity. A third piece, Testing Chastity, Evidencing Rape, Impact of Medical Jurisprudence on Rape Adjudication in India, while not directly about the Nirbhaya event, connects its analysis to the December 16, 2012 gang rape by arguing that the legal reforms that happened in the wake of the event will mean nothing until the discussion of rape in medical textbooks circulating in South Asia is also updated. What all three articles demonstrate are the connections between the Nirbhaya event, the global economy, and India's growing neoliberalism, and the colonial and post-colonial constructions of knowledge and gender that undergird this violent act and the subsequent protests and media responses to it. Courting Injustice, the Nirbhaya case and its aftermath by Rajesh Talwar is a journalistic analysis of the Justice Verma Committee's recommended changes to Indian laws regarding violence against women and what influences these changes may have on actual enforcement. These three articles and Courting Injustice all offer various kinds of discourse analysis of the international media, of the Indian government and the Justice Verma Committee, of protests, and of medical textbooks, of the conversations that are happening about and because of the Nirbhaya event. The next logical step is to read these conversations as an extension of the event itself, as both context for and consequence of the violent gang rape. While many artists I've worked with expressed awareness of some of the other Nirbhaya-inspired performances, all were in agreement that something crucial is happening in India right now, and that no one is doing enough of the work to collect all of the performances into one cohesive whole, to read them in relation to one another, and to insist that they constitute a cultural event. It is my intention to demonstrate how Nirbhaya continues to create a cultural event through the performances and re-performances of violence against women that her story provoked. With the rest of my time here today, I want to share a number of these performances and briefly comment on the way they contribute to this ongoing event. So I'm going to start with Nirbhaya, which is created and written by Yael Farber, who's a South African playwright who works primarily in the UK. So this is a trailer for Nirbhaya. So a couple of things I want to mention, and I'm going to show you a couple of more clips from this piece. Nirbhaya is a piece that Farber devised in collaboration with a group of five Indian actresses, who were sharing their real stories of rape and sexual assault. And she'll tell you a little bit about, in the next clip, about how that came to be. But over the course of the play, each of these five women tells their stories of rape and sexual assault and their experiences with it. It's very graphic. As you saw just from this one clip, all of the violence is depicted pretty realistically on stage. There are some symbolic gestures, but in general, it's as realistic looking as possible in terms of the violence that it presents. So I'm going to go to our second clip, which is an interview with Farber.
December 16, 2012, a young woman boarded a bus in New Delhi with a male friend.
Is it getting any louder?
She was trying to get home from having just watched a movie. What followed in the hours of that night changed countless lives forever. Hers, the young man she was with, the perpetrators, people across India and indeed the world. It certainly changed my life and the group of people who gathered around the idea of creating a production that we have since called Nirbhaya. The name Nirbhaya comes from a pseudonym that was given to Jyoti Singh Pandey, the young woman who was brutally raped for hours on a moving bus in Delhi, who was sexually assaulted with an iron rod so brutally that she died 2 weeks later of her grave injuries. There was something about her courage, something about the way that she fought for her life, and the way she insisted, despite her extraordinarily grave medical condition, on holding the men accountable who had done what they did to her. Her refusal to go down without a fight, her refusal to assume responsibility for what had been done to her. Too often the survivors of sexual violence sit in silence, and this silence implies some kind of shame. If we open up the question of what shame is, it is some kind of an understanding that you are responsible for what happened to you, or that you have to protect yourself or someone else from accountability. A Mumbai-based actress, Purna Jagannathan, reached out to me on the social media network Facebook. She told me that she had seen my work some years previously in New York and was asking me to come to India to create a new work around the incident that had just shocked Delhi and the world. It hardly seemed like a question. I needed to get on the next flight to India. Purna financed both myself and my daughter's visit to India, where we began to workshop around the idea of creating a work culled from the experiences of the survivors of sexual violence themselves. 5 women tell their stories in Nirbhaya. One man and another actress helped to reenact the devastating events of that night, December 16th. We premiered the work in Edinburgh this year at the festival after an incredibly intense creative process. It would have made more sense to open the show the following year, but there is only a small window of time when the streets rise up and people really care about something that is happening in our story-saturated world.
And that interview goes on for about 8 minutes, but I'm going to stop us there. I find these images really difficult to watch just on this screen, and one of the things that Farber emphasizes later in the interview is the importance of live bodies on stage, and the fact that she does not want a proscenium, so she doesn't want there to be a stage and a fourth wall and an audience, and that she very much wanted to stage this as much as possible on the same level as the audience. The actresses actually start out sitting in seats with the audience, and the audience is not supposed to know that they are the actresses. And Nirbhaya herself walks onto the stage as a ghost, and the actresses begin to speak from the audience and move down into the space. So she's very much about putting this violence as much in the faces of her audience as possible. The play premiered first in the UK and then moved to India and was performed in Mumbai and in Delhi a few times. I want to read a little bit of the text. Farber was generous enough to share her script with me. So this is how the play opens. It's not the first line, but it's near the beginning. So an actress named Priyanka says, on December 16th, 2012, a young woman boarded a bus in Munirka, New Delhi with a male friend. What followed changed theirs and countless lives forever. People poured onto the streets in grief and rage, demanding justice. Legally prevented from revealing her real name, the press named her Nirbhaya, fearless. Who knows why one woman's fate touched so many of our lives, but in the wake of her death, many of us began to break the silence and speak of the things that happened to each of us which we never dared utter before. This, then, is our story. So one of the things that I find really interesting about this particular performance is the ways in which these women directly felt that what happened to Nirbhaya gave them the power to speak, gave them the power to share their story. And not only did they shared it in as direct and embodied a manner as they could. As I said, the violence was specifically acted out, and it was done as close to the audience and as much implicating the audience in the performance as possible. So the play concludes with this text, Purna. Something changed after she died. We walked out onto the streets and we said, bring it the fuck on. If you've got something to say it now. Because we have something to say back. We will be silent no more. And then they each announced their names, their real names, and the sexual assault and domestic violence that they have individually survived. And each of them has an absolutely horrifying story. Priyanka. In the wake of her death, men and women poured onto the streets in protest. Ruksa. They faced down water cannons and Lefty charges, demanding justice and change. Purna. For the children violated who lived in silence, carrying our shame. Priyanka. For the 60 million baby girls aborted in the womb. Sapna. For the nameless girls raped who lived in silence all over the world. Sneha. For the women and young girls murdered or disfigured whom no one has ever stood up for. Ruksa. The silent, suffering millions whose light dies, raped by their husbands every night. Purna. In the early hours of the morning, she died. The streets rose. There was no going back. Male actor who, interestingly, does not get a name. To walk towards India Gate, no longer a child, but finally a man. We lay down side by side in the street like Shiva and heard Rumi sing through the wires. The wound is the place where the light gets in. The wound is where the light enters you. Priyanka. And through the streets came Kali, the dark mother herself. The ensemble split apart to reveal Nirbhaya standing with arms spread, white ash pouring through her fingers. She turns and heads for the passage of light upstage. Purna. But we have barely just begun, she tells us as she turns towards the waters. Time dance until your feet ache and break right through the stone-cold floor. The Great Mother is waiting. We can be silent no more. Then she slips away and disappears forever into the Ganga. Nirbhaya, Nirbhaya, Nirbhaya. They all lift their hands in defiance. Nirbhaya stands upstage, incandescent in the white light, the last of her ash falling from her fingers, staring into a distance we cannot see. You leave us your name. Fearless one. And that's how the play ends. I just want to call attention to a couple of things that Farber said in her account of starting to put together this play that I think highlight what's happening in both the opening of the play and the ending. Farber is particularly interested in the way in which these men are held accountable for what has happened, and the ways in which they, in the play as well, are this nameless mass. They're not individual people with individual interests in the situation. They are this idea of a masculinity that is violent and that is performed violently. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about her particular approach is that she thinks there's this limited amount of time to capitalize on this moment. And I use the word capitalize intentionally. I think that for Farber, she sees a lot of the way that international media was talking about this moment, and she sees the ways in which it can be sold as a neoliberal human rights narrative. And I'm going to end up talking about that a lot more in my dissertation itself. So the next piece I want to share with you is Mani Mary, which is a piece written and produced by the Swan Collective. The Swan Collective is a group of men and women, but it's headed by a man who work in Mumbai. They all work in the film industry, but they make music on the side, and they felt particularly moved by this piece, or by this event, and created this piece in order to talk about the event. I'm going to go ahead and start playing it in the background. Is it loud enough?
बुरकी विच मड़ाया किड़ा ए तू जाप जपाया फिकरां दा तू रोना पाके क्यों बस मन्नू डरना सिखाया मानी मेरी मैं नहीं डरना तेरे वर्गा मैं नहीं बढ़ना डुब डुब जाना मैं नहीं तरना मैं ता अखा
So the translation I have here is not of the entirety of the song. I pulled excerpts from the song, and it's the translation that Swan has posted themselves on the YouTube video where they have this playing.
ये काम नहीं है शहरों का, न रात का न दोपहरों का, न खाली खाली सड़कों का, न खिड़की का न पर्दों का।
कपड़े के नाप के फर्कों का क्या मर्दों का ना मर्दों का पूछे में शामिल तुम भी थे ये काम तो है हम दर्दों का।
So I'm just going to turn this down so I can speak over it a little bit. So Swan created, together with a stand-up comedian and a group of women who devised a play, a set of events that they wanted to put together a year after the Nirbhaya event, and they called it Jurat, and they went to Delhi and actually walked the route that the bus had followed while Nirbhaya was being assaulted, and they put on this play. They put on a concert, and they put on this stand-up comedians event over the course of a week. And so for them, one of the things I find really interesting about these particular lyrics is who they choose to blame for what's happening. It's not the doing of cities, so they don't think it's part of the way urban life is structured. It's not the doing of lonely, desolate streets. Neither are windows and curtains guilty of this crime. The length of garments are not responsible. This is neither the doing of men nor impotence. You are amongst those six. This is the doing of well-wishers. Mother, I will not fear. Mother, I will not become you. Father, this is your doing. Every time you said to me, my child, come home soon. What was it you feared would be? I am luggage. I will be stolen. I began to feel that day. It was you who gave them the audacity. Every time you reprimanded me that way, they who fear and run from dogs are chased and bitten in the flesh. So for Swan, a lot of what they're talking about is this idea that women should be afraid, and that the problem is that people think it's okay that women are afraid, and that the goal is to protect women as opposed to create a space that is open and free for everyone. And I'll connect back to this in my conclusion, but one of the things that really speaks to a lot of other performances that are going on is that it's not about protecting women, it's about allowing women to take the risks they wish to take and making a city that's safer for those risks. So I'm running short on time, and I just want to share a couple of other brief performance snippets. Oh no, I just accidentally closed it. 1 second. So this is Maya Krishna Rao's piece, Walk. It's about a 10-minute piece. It's very angry, and it's the sound quality is not great on this particular recording, so I apologize in advance. Maya Krishna Rao is a theater artist who works in Delhi with the National School of Drama, and this particular piece came out almost immediately after the Nirbhaya event. So, in conclusion, I want to turn to a group that is radically changing the conversation about violence against women by demanding that it's not just a question of safety, but one of the right to risk, to laugh, to occupy public space with one's own female gendered body. Such a strategy derides the politics of protection and suggests a critique of performances that may inadvertently support a patriarchal system by demanding protection from men and the government, as Rao just did in demanding these convictions, rather than the right to enjoy public space without fear, which is also, I think, a demand that Rao makes. So she sort of straddles both sides of that line. And here the name Nirbhaya comes to mean something more than being fearless in the face of violence. This group imbues the name with a sense of utopian optimism. They see a world where women are all Nirbhaya because the threat of violence is not the first association they have with the night and with public spaces. This group of women in Mumbai have decided to make a performative protest out of loitering regularly in public spaces where women normally are only seen passing through. The idea was inspired by the book Why Loiter, which argues that there's a complex hierarchy to the ways in which various citizens are allowed to enjoy public space. Women are frequently found near the bottom of this hierarchy, Interestingly, many of the women involved in the loitering group in Mumbai are also involved in other performances that are more direct responses to Nirbhaya. One of them is actually in one of the plays that I have listed, which we can talk about if we have time during the questioning session afterwards. For them, it's not a question of either or, but both and. Both of these things need to be happening, an optimistic demand for the future as well as some sort of anger at what has already come to pass. People should be made more aware of violence against women, but they should also recognize the potentially patronizing tone of expressing a desire to protect women from predatory men. It is here, too, that the reason for my methodology comes full circle. If the real urgency of the Nirbhaya event lies in women's right to risk their own bodies, what better way to demand that right than to perform live, one body speaking to other bodies? If the danger of the reactions to the Nirbhaya event is an increasing neoliberal regulation of public space and turning of public space into semi-private spaces of consumption like malls and coffee shops, what better way to explore alternatives than through an amateur theater that rejected any relationship to profit-making from the very beginning? Feminism, violence, and performance in India. The Nirbhaya event brings these three seemingly disparate topics into conversation with one another, and it allows us to analyze modern South Asian feminisms as embodied practices performed with all the risks such performances entail in urban public spaces. To consider the role of performance is in creating an ongoing conversation that is both structured by and structuring what it means to be a female gendered body occupying these public spaces and what it means to watch other bodies do the same. While there is thought-provoking and significant work published on South Asian feminisms, on violence in South Asia, and on modern Indian theater, the Nirbhaya event and its aftermath affords us an opportunity to think through the inextricable links between these three topics and to consider what performance can do. And I'll stop there.